Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about Illinois communities exploring local grocery taxes, CTA crime, and what grade Illinois received for labor laws. Then the Center Square's Dan McCaleb will join Jim Telemonte to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with your tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler. Here are some of the top stories from the past week. Despite increased spending on safety and security, the Chicago Transit Authority remains plagued by violent crimes. Jim Telemonte reports.
On the same day, murder charges were announced in connection with the fatal shooting of 4 people on a CTA Blue Line train. A CTA worker was injured in a drive-by shooting outside Howard Station on the CTA Red Line. CTA President Dorval Carter said the CTA works closely with police to provide safety.
In the surveys and discussion that we have had, what our customers are looking for is a more visible police presence.
Carter explained CTA spending on security in addition to police presence on buses and trains.
The purpose of security guards serves the same purpose as ambassadors, which is to enforce rules of conduct and to provide other support.
The CTA allocated $65 million to security services in its proposed budget for fiscal year 2024. I'm Jim Talamonte.
Although Illinois is set to eliminate the 1% grocery tax in 2026, a number of Illinois communities around the state are considering reimposing their own tax. As soon as Governor J.B. Pritzker announced that he planned to eliminate the grocery tax, city leaders around the state sounded the alarm, saying getting rid of the tax could be a major blow to their budgets. Milan trustee Bruce Tickle told a Quad Cities TV station that the grocery tax helps fund essential services.
I mean, the businesses and the property tax that we have from the residents, that's what keeps the village going. And those are 2 things you need. And every time something gets taken away, it's just another way you have to come up with another idea on how you can replace that.
Critics say the move puts city leaders in a position where they either have to cut something or raise something, while the governor and the legislature are calling it a tax cut. A new report says Illinois is failing when it comes to worker freedom. Jim Telemonte has more.
Along with policy analyst Andrew Holman, David Osborne, Senior Fellow of Labor Policy for the Commonwealth Foundation, authored the report titled The Battle for Worker Freedom, Grading State Public Sector Labor Laws.
Yeah, well, I hate to say it, Illinois probably set a new standard for F.
Illinois voters approved Amendment 1, the right to collective bargaining measure, in 2022. Osborne says the amendment takes union-friendly legislation to the constitutional level.
And Amendment 1 would basically make it so that anything a union does has the imprimatur of constitutional protection. And it's worse than any statute I could have possibly imagined.
Since the Janus versus AFSCME Council 31 decision in 2018, the nation's 4 largest government unions have lost more than 320,000 members. I'm Jim Talamonte.
Those are the top stories of the week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, the Center Square's Dan McCaleb and Jim Telemonte will get together to further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Kevin Bessler.
They're simple, boring, never thought of until they're needed. They're windshield wipers. Only when Mary Anderson became annoyed that New York trolley drivers were stopping to wipe their windshield by hand did anybody do something about it. By attaching a spring-loaded arm to a rubber blade, one woman made travel easier and safer. Look to innovate and pass it on. From passiton.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. We are recording this on Thursday, September 5th. Safety continues to be a major concern on Chicago Transit after 4 people were shot and killed this week on a CTA Blue Line train. and a CTA worker separately was injured in a drive-by shooting outside the Howard station on the CTA Red Line. Joining me to discuss this is Jim Telemani, the Center Square Chicago-based reporter. Jim, you wrote about the senseless killings of the 4 individuals who were shot and killed on Labor Day. They apparently were asleep. What more can you tell us about it?
Yeah, at least 3 were told were asleep. There's been wide speculation that these were, at least some of them were homeless individuals. It's not uncommon for homeless people to ride the Blue Line. It's one of 2 24-hour lines. And this was late at night, early Labor Day morning, so there probably weren't a whole lot of people around on the train or at the Forest Park station. This is at the end of the line, just west of Chicago. So in the suburb of Forest Park. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of motive. We don't know if the shooter was inebriated or if there was substance. He had prior gun arrests. In both cases, the Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox's office dropped charges in 2019 and 2021.
Wow.
There's been no motive here. So he just apparently, from what the video surveillance has shown and police have said, he just went up to these 4 people who were not all sitting together. He went up and down the train. It was 1 or 2 cars, and just opened fire and killed 4 people. Just random, awful, and or apparently random. And so it's sparked a discussion of larger CTA safety issues, which have been an issue but in this particular case, you wonder if this guy had been walking, anywhere, a mall, a school, a bank, or down the street, and if he might have done something like this, or what could have possibly caused this. But just an awful thing. Yeah,
certainly a horrific story, and it does, that this is one event. But it's sort of a microcosm of what's been an ongoing problem with, particularly train safety within the CTA in Chicago. As part of your coverage of this, Jim, you did touch on security efforts that have taken place over the years and the amount of money that's been spent. Why don't you just tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, in fiscal year 2024, the CTA budget includes $65 million for security services. This is not police. This is, Chicago police patrol anyway. And they're often seen on train platforms and around bus stops and on buses. Now, of course, they can only cover so much territory. The police department is down in numbers, has been for the last several years, really, especially since the riots of a few years ago in the wake of the George Floyd incident. But so CTA is spending $65 million, and those numbers are expected to go up over $70 million within a couple of years. In addition, Department of Homeland Security has funded CTA with infrastructure to help guard against terrorism, terrorist-related incidents. And on top of that, there have been ARPA funds or other federal funds spent as well. So that it's not as if there's a lack of money. But especially on the trains, you sense that in the last few years, people don't feel safe, and the ridership numbers reflect that. The bus numbers are coming back from the pandemic better than the train numbers. And just in everyday conversations, you sense that people feel safer on the buses than they do on the trains.
And Jim, as a longtime Chicago resident, I know you use transit to get to places. What are your general feelings? I mean, do you ride the trains often? Do you ride the buses more often than the trains? I mean, tell us just about your personal experience and what steps you take, or do you avoid any of this stuff?
Yeah, I tell you, especially again in the last few years, you just feel the difference. And there are only so many data points I could point to, but in the last few years, there's a difference. And this is citywide. You feel the difference in that even though some of the violent crime numbers have dropped to a degree, the police department and the mayor, they talk about that. But it seems things are more random. And when it comes to the CTA, the trains especially, you just, complaint after complaint from transit activists and from people on the street that it's not safe. The incidents, this Blue Line incident was one, but then, as I said, the next day, a CTA worker got shot outside the Howard stop on the north side. That's an area that's seen some crime in the last few years. But but you feel the difference, and you just sense that, and I can say personally that I don't ride public transit as much as I used to. If I do, I'm much more likely to take the bus and avoid the trains, unless it's a short stop on a safer line, because it's definitely gotten worse. And I made a trip to New York earlier this summer, and I was stunned at how much safer I felt, on the New York subways. Than I do on the Chicago trains. And just the number of people, just in New York, see everyone's going about their business. No one's coming up to you begging. No one's coming up to you causing problems. A lot of when you do get on a train, the train cars are likely to smell like marijuana now, which was not the case pre-pandemic. So it's there's a lot going on here, and a lot of money is going into this, but it doesn't seem like things are getting better. And there have been a lot of calls from, like say, activists and the general public for the ouster of CTA President Dorval Carter, who's a longtime Chicago political guy, but he's catching a lot of heat right now.
This is really an unrelated story, but there's certainly a connection there to the crime and the safety on CTA transportation vehicles, particularly trains, as you mentioned. A federal judge in Rockford this week ruled that Illinois' ban on carrying concealed weapons on public transportation is unconstitutional, meaning that you can't have the ban of concealed carry on it. Governor Pritzker said he's confident that an appeals court will overrule that decision. Can you just briefly touch on what's going on there?
This is a big story, and this is the governor. Of course, it's an election season. He wants to appeal to the gun control activists, and but there's been a lot of criticism of the governor and of Cook County State's Attorney Fox. The constant pushing for more bans and prohibitions on legal firearms carriers, and meanwhile, the Blue Line shooter had gun charges against him in 2019 and 2021 thrown out by Fox's office. So that we have these gun crimes the gun laws aren't being enforced. And now, a situation like this on the Blue Line, if you can't carry on a bus or train, and a guy like this alleged shooter comes up to you, well, how are you going to defend yourself? And it's no one wants to see all kinds of a lot of people don't want to see a lot of guns all over the place, but at the same time, if there's a bad guy with a gun, there are times when it seems one of the only ways to stop him is if you have a good guy with a gun. And if good guys with the guns aren't allowed on the trains and buses, boy, that makes it even more it seems to me more of a target. So it's very interesting, and how an appeals court might go if they do side with the governor. Certainly, you would think the Supreme Court might weigh in on this, and that might be something that, at least with the current court, would be a little more favorable to legal gun owners.
A reminder that that our listeners can read all about our coverage of these two topics at the centersquare.com. Certainly, hopefully, we won't be writing about these senseless murders very much going forward. But certainly as the case against concealed carry on transit continues in courts, we'll have developments as they occur. Jim, let's move on. Another story about longtime former House Speaker Michael Madigan, who's facing 23 corruption-related counts in federal court. Trial expected to begin, scheduled anyway, to begin next month in Chicago. A new filing by Madigan's attorneys in his corruption-related trials. In the filing, Madigan says they want to exclude any reference to the word corruption and others in that trial. So I don't know if this is, I'm no legal expert, I'm no lawyer. I don't know if this is like just a grasping at straws type of attempt by them. But how do you keep the word corruption out of a corruption trial? Yeah, can you explain that to me?
I really can't, and I hate to make light of it, but imagine if the alleged Blue Line shooter's defense team goes in and says, well, we'd like you to not use the word gun, not use the word kill, not use the word murder, because those words are prejudicial. Not to compare political corruption with murder, obviously. But or if it's a shoplifting case or a tax fraud case, well, can you not use the word steal, theft, and that kind of thing? So it's almost, again, if the story weren't so was so sad, I guess, for the people of Illinois. It would be laughable, but a public corruption case where you can't use the word corruption just seems amazing. This may be, again, we talked a little bit about the Madigan delaying, and this might be an effort to just delay, to require the judge to consider yet another thing to push this back and delay it. It was interesting that even though Lisa Madigan, his daughter, spoke at the DNC, which surprised me, but there was really no talk or no questioning about Illinois Democrats at the DNC, as far as I know, about the upcoming Madigan trial, which, I mean, this was the most powerful man in the state for the better part of 30 years. So this is a big deal. And so not surprising that the current Illinois Democrats want to move on, but a lot of them are in their current places thanks to the power of Mike Madigan. And so he's going to do everything he can to, I guess, try to, he's using the legal power he has. He's an attorney too, and he's been, a lot of attorneys and judges in Illinois are where they are thanks to Mike Madigan. So to not use the word corruption in the corruption trial, I don't know how that can be done.
Let me just read off a couple of the other names or terms that he does not want spoken, mentioned at his trial: patronage, political machine, corrupt politicians, corruption, public corruption task force, Shakman litigation. That term is tied to a consent decree that the city of Chicago and in the courts agreed to many years ago because of all of the patronage jobs that were being handed out in Chicago. So again, that trial is scheduled. Not guaranteeing it's going to happen, but it's scheduled to begin in early October, which is just 1 month before the general election, where in addition to the president being on the ballot, every single one of Illinois' state House seats are on the ballot. About a third of state Senate seats are on the ballot. So it'll be interesting to see if it does move forward next month, the trial, if that has any impact on the election of many of the folks who kept putting Madigan into power year after year. Moving on, a new report came out this week. It actually came out of Pennsylvania. Commonwealth Foundation, which is a free market think tank out of Pennsylvania, did a national analysis of all the states and their worker laws, particularly as they pertain to public employee unions. They graded Illinois with an F for its laws. In fact, we quoted one of the authors of the report from the Commonwealth. Quote, "Well, I hate to say it, Illinois probably set a new standard for F."
Yeah, so as our education grades fail, so do our worker freedom standards. And this report, I talked with David Osborne, one of the authors of this, and the report's very well done, very neatly laid out, organized, yet concise and easy to read, but also very data driven. And somehow we in Illinois managed a D- 2 years ago when they last did this report. Now we're an F, and a large part of this, Osborne says, is because Illinois voters approved Amendment 1, the right to collective bargaining measure, which gives unions so much power that it's actually, according to Osborne, constitutional power. He says it's worse than any statute I could have imagined. And so he said since unions can't force non-union members to pay a fee as a condition of employment, this is since the Janus decision in 2018, the unions are really digging in to do everything they can to gain more power in whatever way they can. And so the 4 largest government unions, according to this Commonwealth report, they're down 320,000 members collectively since the Janus decision. So workers, some are opting out and choosing freedom, but that freedom is less prevalent here in Illinois, according to this report, than it is in other states. And our neighboring states are doing a lot better.
Just for a little bit of context, the Janus decision refers to the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court involving one Mark Janus, who was a caseworker for an Illinois state agency who was being forced to pay union dues to his union, even though he said he was completely 100% against the union's politics. As we know, public employee unions of all sorts, teachers unions are the ones that are in the media spotlight the most. They collect dues from their members. Some of that money goes to help in collective bargaining situations, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of that money goes into political campaigns of lawmakers. I think I saw a report where something like more than 98% of teacher union campaign contributions go to Democrats to get them elected in office, and then they get into office and they turn around and support more union protections, etc. This new constitutional amendment that you referenced that essentially guarantees union rights in the state constitution. You're seeing that play out in Chicago with the Chicago Teachers Union, who are negotiating a new contract with the city. Not only are they collectively bargaining for wages and working conditions, they have a whole bunch of other demands that seem completely unrelated to their jobs. Things related to green energy and electric school buses, things related to housing subsidies in the city, things like that. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, well, there's no question now with the Chicago mayor being a former Chicago Teachers Union member and lobbyist. So as in a sense, they're asking for more than the school district can possibly even do. Like all electric school bus fleets. They want queer compliant counselors in every school. Well, I mean, I don't know how many people are applying for these jobs, but I mean, there's a big school system. That you mentioned the housing subsidies, rebuilding, old buildings and just major construction projects. The list of demands is even if Brandon Johnson wants to probably do all these things, but it's just not possible to do within the time frame of the contract that CTU is asking for. But they're asking for the moon, and they'll get every bit of it that they can. But in the meantime, the teachers union power just seems to be as strong as ever in Chicago. But there are some voices even inside the union who are not happy, and they don't like all of this. They just, they want to teach and would like the focus to be on academics. But it seems in the union demands, big focus on pay raises, which you'd expect, but not much focus at all on academics.
Yeah, and when you look at the test scores in Chicago, they're really sad. Chicago schools are failing a ton of students in their system, and you mentioned these contract demands, and are they doable within the time scale of what the new contract would be? And that's not even to mention the city's massive budget deficit. The teachers union wants tons of new spending, not just on salaries and things like that, but all these other things that you brought up. The city's facing a significant budget deficit.
Yeah, we're near $1 billion, and that's from the mayor's office. So this doesn't. We talked with the founder of Truth in Accounting about a month ago. She said, well, actually, the Chicago Public Schools budget, that's a political document. She said the numbers are real. The real numbers are actually much worse than $500 million deficit for CPS alone. And again, this new contract hasn't been done yet. So we're in a big hole, and it's getting deeper and deeper. And at some point, something's got to happen. And the mayor's talked about a long-term high-interest loan, but that's not going to help the picture long-term at all.
Good point, Jim. If you borrow money to pay off things, then you accumulate more debt. You have to pay interest back on that debt, and it kind of snowballs into something that, just look at the federal debt right now. The federal debt is surpassed $34 trillion with a T dollars, and economists and others are warning that it's almost going to be unmanageable. Chicago Teachers Union, I should point out, the contract ended in June. The negotiations are ongoing, and listeners can keep up with that story and more at thecentersquare.com. Jim, thanks for joining us. Greg Bishop is expected to be back next week, but I'll tell you what, I've enjoyed doing this with you the last 2 weeks. So I don't know, maybe Greg doesn't have a job.
Oh, we miss him, but I had a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this, Dan.
I miss him as well, and I know the whole team does. Thank you, and we'll talk again next week.